So let's get started. And today's session is how loops lead to leverage. And again, I introduce Jeff Heil from Breakthrough Learning. We've been really excited to see his new platform in development called Cauzality, and very excited to be able to share that with you. But to start, let's look at our own experience within this systems thinking community. And this is a poll called Slido. And all you do is just take your phone, if you have a phone nearby, and put it on camera, hold it up to the QR code in the corner, and you will see a little pop-up that you just press. It's a Safari pop-up typically. And if you could just choose which of these four statements best matches your experience with causal loops. And this will populate in real time, so we can see quickly. This will really help Jeff and I be able to address the various needs of the people in this group. So far we've got a lot of, I can tell a story of a loop but have trouble drawing. New to causal loops also. We have people who teach others how to make causal loops. That's terrific. If you are having trouble with Slido, go ahead and put in the chat too, maybe which, just, any descriptor of your experience, that would help us as well. Okay, so Jeff, this is helpful? We ready to go? Oh, awesome. Okay, so for those of you that are somewhat new to the Water Center for Systems Thinking, we have a set of 14 habits of a systems thinker that we use to really look at what are the practices, what are the habits of thinking that systems thinkers make as their practice as they are on this journey to become a systems thinker. So we want to share with you the habits that we're going to be practicing today. Most obviously, identifies the circular nature of complex cause and effect, because causal loops are the perfect tool to be able to practice that habit. In addition, we're going to be looking at the connections between parts of a system and to be able to define those with causal connections. We are also going to look at how causal loops really make a picture of a system structure, and it shows how that structure, those interrelationships, determine the behavior of the system, how the system actually behaves on a day-to-day basis. And with the knowledge of that structure, and the causal map is a perfect tool to be able to look at that structural design, we're in much better positions to be able to identify leverage areas or leverage actions. In addition, when you're making maps with others, which Cauzality is the tool that really encourages that collaboration, it also asks us to be able to change our perspectives and see the system through one another's eyes in order to increase our understanding. And with that, it also helps us reflect on our own mental models, that is the picture, the view, or the interpretation that we have of the system, the assumptions that we make, and also consider how those impact the way we see our system, both today and in the future. With causal maps, there's never a finish line. There's always opportunities to improve it, to check it, to make changes as needed. And so successive approximation is an active habit as well. And lastly, with that big picture causal map, it definitely helps us seek a greater understanding of the bigger picture of the system of interest. So those are the habits that we will be practicing today during this next hour. And with causal loop mapping, it's really helpful to kind of begin with a story that might need some clarification, or an issue that you're looking to seek some resolution. It could be a problem or a challenge. It also can really increase your understanding and inform not only your own understanding of the system, but a group's effort to share that collective view of what a system is and the important connections that exist within that system. It also provides new insight. It might test a theory, and there might be other ways, purposes for making causal loop maps. But beginning with a story is quite helpful. So I want to kind of bring in some 8-year-old wisdom and inspiration. And just a couple weeks ago, Kathy Lose, who is a systems thinking coach here in Tucson, Arizona, where I reside, was in a classroom of Meta Franklin. And Meta was teaching her 8-year-olds reinforcing loops. So she began with showing them the structure at the very top of the drawing here with just a very simple 2-variable loop, two variables, two things that change over time in a loop, and asked the children to come up with a story. So they wrote their story, and then they used at the very bottom the structure of that reinforcing loop and instead of words, to make illustrations. So in this case, this wisdom is: the more I focus and learn, the more fun I have. And the more fun I have, the more I focus and learn. So in this case, fun appears to be the leverage for this teacher. So that's some inspiration for some very simple loops. And if 8-year-olds can do it, then we all can do it for sure. So before I turn it over to Jeff, I want to just, especially for people that are new, to understand that the arrows in a causal loop diagram, there's 2 different types of arrows. And so we're going to do a little practice. So here we have family fun as something that can change over time, in addition to quality of relationships, which can change over time. And in this case, there's a green arrow, which means they move in the same direction. Now, when we teach this, whether it's to kids or adults, we use thumbs. So I don't know if you can see my webcam, but I'm going to ask my teammates to kind of follow along with me and say, when family fun goes up, most likely quality of relationships go up. So they are moving in the same direction, or we sometimes label the arrow with an S. So let's do some other practices, and you can use your thumbs as well. As team effectiveness goes up, hopefully professional satisfaction goes up. Now, with this green arrow in the same direction, it doesn't mean that it always is up, up. It could be in the other direction, meaning down, down, which means as team effectiveness goes down, most likely professional satisfaction would go down. So therefore, it's still same direction, but going in both the same way. The next one, we have time spent sitting at a desk, which lately has been quite a bit, which can have an opposite causal link to daily activity. So as time spent sitting at a desk goes up, daily activity level would go down, meaning that that would have an O, or opposite, as a possible label to that loop. Working from home, now this could be a depends. As working from home goes up, it could lead to more work productivity, meaning same direction. But in some cases, working from home could possibly have an opposite. So it depends on your story. It depends on how you see the causal links and to be able to describe how that story plays out. So that'll give you a little bit of an introduction, because Jeff is going to be using this green and red distinction between these 2 types of causal links. So lastly, I want to give you the why an online platform is so needed in this space in drawing links, in drawing causal maps. So here's an example of a collaborative map. This was done right before COVID. This was a community that was working together, very different roles people were playing in that community. And they came together to draw a map of how they could support young children's care and education throughout that community. So you can see that they were drawing, you know, those connections, those pluses and minuses are like the S's and O's in being able to label their links. But then they tried to pull out the loops with their highlighter to say, okay, here are some interesting loops here. And they even put Post-its to kind of make comments about those. And it's on chart paper. And at the end of this work, it got rolled up and then probably is sitting in the corner of some office right now. The experience was wonderful for them, but it wasn't, they didn't have access to this really powerful work. And so Cauzality is the name of the platform that Jeff is working on, that when we first got introduced to the beta version, we thought, oh, this is going to be so helpful. So what we'd like you to do before I turn it over to Jeff, and as I turn it over to Jeff, is to think about a system that we all have in common right now. And it has been just about 1 year since most of us have been impacted by the global pandemic. So I'd like you to think about your work and life system in this past year and some of the key things that have changed over time. And we invite you to type some of those things in the chat. And I gave you a few things to kind of get you started, but there are no wrong answers here. It's what are things that have changed over time that have really impacted your work and life systems over the past year. And so Jeff, as people are chatting in, I'm going to stop sharing. As people are sharing in the chat. Some of those things, yeah, children learning at home while I'm working, absolutely, thank you so much. Physical location, social isolation, absolutely. So Jeff, I'm gonna turn it over to you.
Thank you to Tracy, and big thanks to everybody at the Water Center that has organized this open studio and graciously put the spotlight on this new tool, this new platform that myself and others from my team have been working very hard on for the last more than a year at this point. So today I'll be taking you through an example on this topic that we're thinking about right now, work and life during a pandemic. And I'll be using our new tool, Cauzality, to demonstrate. And this is a beta version of the product. We're officially launching this product in the summer, June 1st, and we are accepting signups at cauzality.com. If you'd like to receive email updates, we'll keep you informed about our launch. And we are also still accepting some beta testers. So for those of you that see this today and like it and can't wait until the summer to give it a try, you can send me an email. My email is there, jeff@belearning.com. And we can talk about setting you up as a beta tester where you would provide feedback in exchange for free access to the tool for a limited time. And people in our beta test group, by the way, range from people in higher education. There are businesses, small and large, people doing community work, volunteer work, grassroots work, government agencies, everybody. So just want to put that out there. And today I'll be showing you how to create and make sense of a complex system map that's full of interdependencies, feedback loops, and leverage points. You'll see here how pretty much anyone can be included in this process using Cauzality, including people who have little or no experience with mapping systems or systems thinking in general. You'll see how Cauzality is designed to build conceptual models, not mathematical ones, for those who are more advanced with system dynamics and interested in simulation modeling. There are a number of tools out there that may meet the need for you, and we do plan to support people who want to make the transition from conceptual to simulation modeling with an export feature in the future. But our focus is on building conceptual understanding of systems, people's capacity to move beyond linear thinking to a systemic understanding of the causes of problems and the most effective ways to improve results. Specifically, Cauzality gets people very engaged in an interactive process that enables them to learn and have conversations around complex ideas, which is otherwise sometimes pretty challenging. The tool builds group consensus, whether it's a group of learners in a classroom setting or stakeholders working in an organization or a community. People's diverse views naturally come together for a shared understanding while bringing about focus on what's most important in the system that the group is exploring. And without studying the discipline, and after just a little time spent adding ideas to the map, some core systems thinking principles will emerge in this process, revealing interdependencies, feedback loops, and leverage points. And finally, as teams gain insight about their area of interest, they become better decision makers because they're able to see and manage the ripple effects, the consequences of actions that produce different results. To prepare for this presentation, Tracy and I decided on this topic of work and life during the pandemic, and she came up with a great list of things to get us started. Some of this is reflected in the chat as well as you're contributing those ideas. I want to point out that the knowledge, if we can call it that, represented here in this list is disconnected or unstructured. We have some very relevant ideas and we even know how they're changing here in a list like this, but it doesn't tell us what's causing what, and it doesn't help us understand where to focus our attention and our resources in order to get certain results. Unfortunately, a lot of people who are doing important work in complex systems all over the world don't get too far past this point of a list, and I'll show why that's problematic. And I'm going to pose this question to you now, but ask you to hold your answer until the end, because while I know you are all intrigued by loops and leverage, at least by indication of being here, I'm sure some of you are not quite convinced that structured knowledge is necessarily better than a list of good ideas or more practical. I hope to have you convinced by the end. But for now, let's hold that question and jump into the software, and I'll start with giving you a quick tour. All right, so when you first go to Cauzality, you can see I'm accessing this application via a browser. It works on any major browser. You sign in with your account and you're taken to this gallery page where you've got all these different maps that you've been creating, and you can add a new map. Click into a new map. I've got a head start on one here. And when you launch into a new map, you've got this prompt here to double click anywhere to add an interest point. I'll explain what that is in a second. But you have an opportunity to name your map. Typically, it's the topic that you're exploring or a challenge that you're facing as a team. And if I open up my map menu, you can see there's a place for collaborators. Right now, and for the purpose of the demo, it's just me in here, but I could easily add more people into my map by inviting them with email. And they would be able to access the same map from their own browser, and we would see each other's cursors moving around. We would see each other's changes that are being made in real time. So that's one distinction, as Tracy mentioned here, is that this is designed to support collaboration. And as many of us know, this is meant to be, best to be a collaborative process. Another thing I want to point out before I start creating this map is there's this level progress bar, and you can see I'm in level 1. This is another important distinction with Cauzality, is that there's a scoring system embedded. And I'm just going to show you an overview of what's in these 3 levels, and then we'll come back to this as we go. The first level is about building capability. And there's certain metrics here that are important to achieving this goal of building capability with making a system map. Once those goals are satisfied, the team is moved into level 2, where they're now into understanding interdependencies, and some more advanced concepts like feedback and depth and clarity are introduced, because now that we've established a level of capability with the tool, we should be at a point where we're starting to explore and understand interdependencies, and these would help us confirm that we are moving along in this process toward a map that is more useful. And that takes us to level 3. Ultimately, we want people to develop a mature level 3 map that is built for discovering key insights. And again, the metrics have changed and new concepts are introduced. So the scoring system somewhat gamifies this experience. It engages people. It also serves to motivate people. It's a structure that's generating a behavior, motivating people to build maps that are ultimately more useful, that have these systemic characteristics that we look for when we're doing this kind of work. I'll also point out there is a chat feature. Again, if you're collaborating, you may be working in person. If that's possible, you could be working remotely using Zoom. Either way, you have an ability to leave messages for each other and have that added feature for collaboration. All right, so I'm going to get into the mapping part now. And there are two basic components to any system map. And they include interest points, first of all. We call them interest points. You might know them as variables or concepts or nodes. And the other is a connector or a causal connector relationship between interest points. So starting with interest points, what I do to begin is, as a team, we're thinking about what are some things that are changing? What are some concepts or variables that are changing in our area of interest, quality of life during a pandemic? And just going off of what we've already looked at in that initial list and some of the ideas that were contributed, that's a great way to start, to just throw things on the board, start brainstorming some ideas. So feeling isolated, virtual meeting skills would be another thing we want to watch. Ability to manage work-life balance is another good one. And so you can see I can easily add and move around what we call interest points. And I'm going to now leave this map and save us some time. I'm going to go to a more advanced map. We've got lots of concepts now, not just those initial 3. Things like screen time and hope for the future and connectedness with friends and family. And so this is a good place to show you how the second component of any system map can be introduced. And that's, again, a connector. So when we have a couple of these ideas, we only need a few, we can start drawing causal connections between them. And it's easily done. You just put your mouse over the top of an interest point. You see this arrow icon appear, and then you just click, drag, and release. And you've now started to establish a causal relationship between things. And just like Tracy introduced, we have these options. We can choose to say that change is occurring in the same direction or in the opposite direction between concepts. So if we're more connected during a pandemic with friends and family, then feelings of isolation should go down. So that would be a logical connector to draw there. And then the team can continue to ask themselves, well, what causes this, or why this? Connectedness with friends and family, I can see, is going to be influenced by our opportunities to socialize. We have those opportunities. We should be more connected with family. So this is, in this case, a same connector. And I can go even further upstream and see that the ability to manage work-life balance, more of that would produce more opportunities for people in a community to socialize during a pandemic. So again, a same connector. So already I've got a little causal story here. I can see that if ability to manage work-life balance is high, it'll ultimately have an impact on feeling isolated. And if it's low, it'll have a different impact. So you can tell the story easily. And if you can move around these interest points, you see everything stays nicely connected. Another thing you can do with these interest points that I want to point out is you can open them up and you have some options. You can add a measure to any interest point, and measures are really helpful for a couple reasons. They help us be explicit about what we're saying. So if we're talking about quality of life during a pandemic and we're a group of community leaders working within a specific community, we don't just want to know about the number of people with COVID-19 anywhere. We want to know about specific, maybe county data that is telling us how many people in our community have COVID. And so county data tracker might be our measure. And so you can see a quantitative measure works. A qualitative one would work too. The ability to manage work-life balance could be measured by surveying people in the community. And so adding those measures helps us be explicit about what we mean by that. They also become very important when we talk about key interest points. And these are all interest points. One of the things that people are asked to do early in this process by the mapping guide that comes with the software, or a facilitator, coach, or instructor that's helping guide people through this process, is to pretty early on try to think about which of these concepts are key. Which ones would we want to be paying most attention to as they change over time to tell us how we're doing in our purpose of improving quality of life during a pandemic. And so the number of people with COVID-19 would be an indicator, a good thing to watch, a key indicator, if you will. We call it a key interest point. I can select the star icon and hit save, and you can see I now have this visual cue that's one of my key indicators. And at this time, I'm going to go back to the score and show you some of the progress that we've made. So level 1 is now almost halfway done. And if I open up my map analysis screen, you can see I've satisfied, we as a team have satisfied our breadth measure. We've demonstrated a level of capability by adding breadth to our map. We've started to demonstrate an understanding of connectivity. We have 3 out of the required 8 connectors on our map at this point. And because I added a key interest point and put a measure on there, we are able to measure our map. We're starting to be able to measure the performance or behavior of this system. And so our measurability progress has gone up a bit. Okay, I'm going to make a few more connections here, and you'll see some other things start just happening as I do that. So let's see, I'm going to go down here around mental health, and maybe we were just looking at some research about how physical exercise can do some things to help with mental health, reducing stress, anxiety, depression. So if physical exercise in the community is high, mental health should be impacted by that in a same relationship. Maybe financial security also helps mental health. And when I did that, I've added a second causal connector to mental health. You might have noticed a gray ring appeared around this interest point. And what that is called is a strong point. If I move ahead to level 2, even though I haven't satisfied all this criteria yet, I can show you why that's relevant. In level 2, we're trying to understand interdependencies in our system. One of the metrics is our depth score. We don't just want breadth in a system map, lots of ideas all over the place. We want densely interconnected maps that have depth, because that's how real world systems work. And you can see I have a depth score that's 7% out of the target 40%. And this is calculated by looking at the percentage of interest points that are also strong points. And so again, a strong point represented by this gray ring, we define it as strong because we know more about what causes this to change. We have more than one causal connector flowing into it. And so far, it's the only one on this map that we have as a strong point. So strong points are important. And of course, there's more we could do here to develop our understanding of mental health. It may be the case that we understand as a community that having COVID-19 not only affects physical health, but it also affects mental health. And since that just came up, I'll go ahead and add physical health as another interest point, which is negatively impacted by COVID-19. Physical exercise, though, on the other hand, increases physical health. And so just like that, we have another strong point. There's something else here that we have a stronger understanding of, again, because we have more than one thing causing it to change. Okay, up here, I'm going to make some more connections and you'll see something new happen. The more we're working from home, that has consequences. That gives us more time spent on screens. So that's a connection I can make, which of course builds virtual meeting skills, which is a great thing. It has another consequence. It's rare that one thing changing only leads to one other thing changing. And so there's more interdependency here where people are starting to develop screen fatigue. When they spend more time on screens. And I can follow this causal story and think, well, what does an increase in virtual meeting skills lead to? That leads to better job performance when working from home. So work from home job performance belongs on this map. And I can draw a causal connector there. And maybe I'm thinking that job performance going up in working from home would increase our working from home. But what we would call this is something that's in our mapping guide called a giant leap. There's some unspoken assumptions here. Because if leaders who are making decisions about working from home at a company aren't pressured or aware of better job performance, it would be an assumption to make, a leap to make, to say that this causes that. So there's a missing concept here, and that's pressure to return to in-person work. And now that I've done that, I can complete this causal story that I wanted to. Better job performance working from home increases pressure to work, decreases the pressure to return to in-person work because maybe we don't have to anymore. And then the lower we have pressure, the less pressure there is to return to in-person work, the more we will continue working from home. And after making those connections, you might have noticed that this causal chain of concepts has now gone from a solid line to a dotted line that's in motion. And so what just happened was the software noticed that this is a feedback loop. And there's a feedback loops panel here in the upper right corner. I can call that up and see that the software put a feedback loop in this list. It's calling it loop A, and it's noticing that it's a reinforcing loop. I can highlight just that loop, making everything else fade to the background and look at it in isolation. This becomes more useful as we get to a more complex map. And with this kind of focus, I can tell a causal story about how more screen time, or let's start here, how more working from home, how we're all experiencing that, most of us during this pandemic, increases our screen time, which then increases our virtual meeting skills, which improves our job performance in working from home, which then has this now inverse or opposite relationship of decreasing the pressure to return to in-person work, which then again, an opposite relationship increases work from home. So again, a reinforcing loop, change in one direction, starting at this place, will come all the way back and feedback to only cause change, more change in the same direction. So we call this a vicious or virtuous cycle. It can amplify change in one direction or another. Similarly, if we're not working from home much, we have little screen time and less virtual meeting skills and less job performance quality in working from home, which increases the pressure to return to in-person work, which then further decreases the amount of time people in a community are spending working from home. So it works both ways, as Tracy mentioned earlier. Now, that's one type of loop, a reinforcing loop. People that are familiar will know that there's also a balancing loop in any system map, a balancing dynamic that can be at play. And just like how screen time had one consequence of improving our virtual meeting skills, and then this other one of adding screen fatigue, well, that would then decrease our job performance in working from home if we're getting tired of looking at our screens. And as soon as I made that connection, another loop appeared. And again, the software automatically saw that this is a balancing loop, and I can look at that in isolation. I can look at both of these and think about them and understand that there are two different dynamics at play here within just 5 or 6 concepts that are overlapping. All right. I'm going to zoom ahead now to a more advanced map, and we'll take a look at metrics in levels 2 and 3. So this team that's working on quality of life during a pandemic has spent a lot of time now thinking about all the different causal relationships, and has produced a pretty interesting mature map at this point. I'm going to zoom in a little bit so you can see some of it. And look, my level progress has jumped up at this point to level 3. So we're making really good headway toward creating a map that's complete. I'm going to go back to level 2 just to show you that I've reached the depth score just barely. We have 40% depth at this point. We could do more work on that, but we have enough to move on. Our clarity is good. I'll explain how this is measured in a minute. We have plenty of feedback loops. We actually have 20 feedback loops. We only need 2 to demonstrate a level of understanding of interdependencies. And we're now into level 3, where we're looking at stability, focus, and leverage as metrics. And stability is measured by, as you see here, the presence of balancing feedback loops. We want to reach at least 20% balancing feedback loops compared to all feedback loops. And you can see I have 15, so I'm not quite there yet. And again, if I look at my feedback loops panel, very useful to be able to spot which ones are balancing and reinforcing. And you might notice that out of all the 20 plus loops we have here, there's only a couple that are balancing. And again, helpful to look at those in isolation. And we include this metric for a couple reasons. People tend to think a little more easily about reinforcing dynamics. Balancing dynamics tend to be a little bit harder for people to wrap their heads around. And so this is, in one way, a reminder to include balancing loops in a system map. The other reason that it's included is because we know from research and literature in the field of system dynamics and in systems thinking that real world systems have both happening. And so if we're trying to develop a map that helps us understand things more deeply, or that can be used for decision making perhaps, we want to make sure that our map is reflective of a real world system and therefore reliable for understanding and decision making. So that's stability. 2 more metrics here, final metrics I want to explain: focus and leverage. Now, focal points, we need 5 of those, are defined as being interest points that are part of more than one loop, more than one feedback loop. And if I use my eyeball icon here in the bottom left, I can control some visibility and see some of these things in isolation, not just feedback loops, but some of these terms like a focal point. So when I click that, you can see all the focal points in my system highlight. And again, these are interest points that are part of more than one feedback loop. And the reason we care about these, we're trying to draw people's focus to them, is because if change were to occur in one of these areas, or if we were to take action in one of these areas, it would have a cascading impact across multiple feedback loops that make up our system. And therefore it would have influence on the results that we're watching for in our system. And if I use my cursor to highlight over any one of these focal points, if you're looking to the right side of the screen, you'll see that all the loops it's a part of highlight with a blue background. So look at that. Mental health is part of many feedback loops in this system. So are all of these. They are all part of multiple feedback loops. Once you have focal points, you have the potential to create leverage points, which is the final metric. Now, leverage points are user defined. The team can decide which of these focal points are leverage points. And there's a couple ways they might go about deciding that. For one, it may be intuition or knowledge on the subject that's not quite represented in this map because it is conceptual. That would determine, what we believe are areas of leverage, greatest leverage, where change would produce the greatest results. Another way to think about that is which of these focal points belongs to the most leverage points, or excuse me, belongs to the most feedback loops. Again, mental health belongs to a lot of them. And then finally, which ones of these have the most arrows flowing out of them? Which one of these focal points has the most causal connectors flowing out of them? So they're creating change, they have outputs. And so considering all these things, we might as a team decide, hey, wow, mental health is really a leverage point in driving quality of life during a pandemic. And if I open up my interest point, click the leverage point icon, you can see I've now made it a leverage point and the appearance changes. It's a double blue line. I can turn off this visibility control and see my whole map again in view and see visibly where is there leverage in the system as was determined by the team. And that did improve my score a little bit. I still have more work to do on stability. I need a second leverage point, but after doing those things, I would have reached a mature level 3 map. Now, this process drives people to see things that are most important. It also helps people see what's maybe not so important, even if they had ideas about that going into the process. So let me give you an example of that. Imagine this is a group of community leaders, as I said, working on quality of life during a pandemic. And somebody with a really big voice and bold idea comes in and says, I think healthy eating is the answer. I think if we just get food trucks out to all the different neighborhoods with organic, healthy, nutritious food, we're going to have a great impact on the quality of life during a pandemic. Well, they may have that idea, but the knowledge that these stakeholders have pieced together through this process doesn't really reflect that level of importance on this interest point. It's not a focal point. It's not even part of any feedback loops. And so if we want to make that claim, we have more work to do to show how this influences other things, and in particular, the things that we see as leverage points in our system. So I'm sure we've all experienced that, where a big idea comes in and sort of dominates a conversation or a planning process, but we have no real way to measure the quality of that thinking. And so a process like this, in particular with the ability to objectively, sort of quasi-objectively with the scoring system, say what's most important and what should sort of fall by the wayside. So lots of different uses for something like this, for causality or creating a loop diagram. For example, you could be senior leaders, senior managers that are creating a new business plan or evaluating or improving an existing plan. It could be leaders modeling a present versus future state of an organization to try to identify what are going to be the change requirements and transition steps for getting us to where we want to be. It could be students studying a current event like a pandemic to understand its causes and repercussions, community coalition members, people exploring ways to collaborate to meet common goals, policy analysts exploring the causes and likely outcomes of alternative policies and actions to figure out what's the best policy going forward. I'm sure there are many other potential uses out there. Some may be on your mind. I want to now, before I open it up to ask for questions or comments, and back to that original question about which is better or more useful, just compare this approach to conventional alternatives. If you were to use a list of ideas as a group of leaders coming together, that would be highly subjective, as we saw by the healthy eating example. people may decide, well, we're all sort of thinking about this same idea. It's the first one that came on our list. It's the one we all understand the most. Let's just go with that. And so there are problems with these approaches that are maybe conventional and don't go quite this far to really understand a system that you're operating within. Another alternative approach to this that many of you may be familiar with is getting an outside expert to come in and do some of this work. And that has some issues. For one, it's not involving the stakeholders themselves and leveraging the knowledge they have about the topic. And because of that, because they're not involved in the process, they may be handed a report at the end of hiring a consultant, spending thousands of dollars on that, that says, here's what you need to do. And if any of us have been a part of that kind of experience, I think the statistics say 98% of strategic plans that are created aren't actually followed. More commonly, we take a look at that, we review it, we put it in a drawer and forget about it. So these other alternative methods to problem solving, deep understanding, planning, decision making often fall short of meeting the need to actually understand what kinds of changes will produce desired results. So back to that question, which is more useful, unstructured knowledge, like the list of ideas that are good, or structured knowledge like a system map or a knowledge map can produce. I'd love to hear if there are any ideas about how you could use causality or something like causality in your own work now that you've seen how this can work. I'd like to know if there are any unanswered questions about loops and leverage that myself or others from Water Center might be able to help answer for you. And just any other reactions or questions, I'd welcome any of that here in this last bit of time we have, about 10 minutes. So please feel free to unmute yourself and shout out a question or use the chat feature and we'll try to get them answered.
Yeah, and Jeff, I'm also, people can use the reactions and just raise a hand too. But we really, there was an early question about how is causality different than some of the other platforms out there like Kumu and possibly Sticky Note and some of those others.
Yeah, I can address that and I'll sort of be hitting on points I've already made, but I can sum it up for you. So causality is collaborative. You're not seeing that demonstrated here, but it's designed for people to collaborate in real time around a topic, either remote or in person. Let's see, it has the embedded scoring system, which allows you to evaluate the quality of your thinking or the systemic nature of your thinking, the reliability, the completeness of your map, all of that, and also gamifies the experience and drives people to create more useful, more complete maps. It helps simplify complexity when you reach that point of having that big, giant, messy map and you maybe need to explain it to somebody else. There are these features of highlighting certain things that are key that can help you with storytelling and presentation and explaining and making sense of, simplifying something complex. We also try very hard to make this intuitive and user-friendly. It's very tempting to add all kinds of different bells and whistles and capabilities. And we will continue to develop this to meet the design objectives that we have and further those. But we'll keep in mind, top of mind, making this tool accessible for people. And that means making it user-friendly and intuitive to use so that there aren't barriers to get into it. You can just start throwing ideas in a map, and then before you know it, the systems thinking part of it kind of sneaks up on you, and you've got something really useful that you can leverage.
And Jeff, Christine has a comment. Christine, do you want to unmute and just elaborate on that?
Sure, thanks for the opportunity. So I have used basically brainstorming with a group of people to talk about causes that might contribute to a particular situation or problem. And then through that brainstorming, we kind of theme, the different comments that people have or of potential causes. And then using those themes, we then talk about which theme has more of a strong driving force on another component, so that at the end, this relations diagram kind of lets us know, hey, this particular cause, if we address this, it's going to have the greatest impact on mitigating or improving whatever we want to, the desired results. So I find that people can really easily track that process, but I guess, maybe it's not so, obviously it's not as robust and complex, but sometimes it seems that people track it easily and are more comfortable making decisions on it too, is at least my experience. And just wanted to see what your thoughts were. I'm out.
Thank you. That's a great question. And kudos to you to taking it to that point. I think that would be a wonderful place to activity to do with people prior to maybe taking it into causality. So those ideas would just fit right into a causality map and could be developed further. And that's something that you could do on behalf of your group after you've done the work that you do that you're more comfortable with affinity diagrams and relations diagrams. And then, maybe on your own or with several of those stakeholders, consider how you might continue to build out an understanding of that system and push it further. I would say the only hesitation I would have at stopping there is that, sort of like the food truck example, you're relying on people's intuition. You're sort of asking them the question, what do you think is most powerful here, without maybe having a complete representation of the system. And it's a little grayed out here, but on this slide, you can see, mental health may not have been top of mind for people at the beginning of a process. And it's only because the process naturally brought that to the forefront, not people's own intuition about what's important, that it became something that the group realized, wow, this actually needs to be something where we're focused. So I would suggest, maybe using that as a starting point to populate what would become a larger map with a greater representation of all the different factors that may be at play.
And Jeff, there's a question from Amy, and it's where do stock flow diagrams fit in this?
Yeah, they don't quite fit. There's no way to add values to these interest points, at least at this point, so that you can represent a level of stock in a concept that is going up or down based on the things that are flowing to it. As I said at the very beginning, we are very interested in integrating with other tools that are out there that get into more of the mathematical exploration of complex systems and into the system dynamics territory. And at this point, what that would be an export function that imports these ideas. And then once you're in that new software, you could do the stock flow diagramming that you would like to do. But again, our focus here is on building people's conceptual understandings of systems. I think that's where we have the most ground to gain with people, is moving people away from just linear thinking, which we're all just so stuck in thinking about, even us systems thinkers, and moving toward a more circular, an understanding of cause and effect that is circular. So that's what I would say about that. Mm-hmm. Thanks for the question.
So any other questions, either unmute or maybe we have time for maybe like one or two more. And as people are either typing or thinking, I wanted to make one comment that I had shared with Jeff before, but in our work, we have done a lot of group causal map making, mostly using before pandemic chart paper and stickies and all of that. And what we have noticed in that more face-to-face paper pencil is that the person who has the marker, it's the power of the pen. And there's sometimes that selective listening that ends up whose ideas actually get up. So the ability to have a system where everybody is online and equal and can put things up there sounds like it's going to be great. Kind of level that out. So here's some other questions. So will the online program be a freemium platform or others?
Yeah, I'll try to answer this quickly. I'm glad it came up. I see other good questions here in these last few minutes. Hopefully I can answer them. So we don't yet have a formal pricing structure. We are actually looking to our beta testers to help give us feedback about that. So if you'd like to influence the way we set up pricing for this, consider becoming a beta tester. I will say that we will probably follow what we see out there in the world with other collaborative online tools like Zoom or Trello or Miro, where there is a monthly subscription, there's an annual version of that fee that's lower. And I'll also say we would love to offer academic pricing, student and teacher, reduced pricing for students and teachers would be something we'd like to do. And some version that's free, that's either limited in its functionality or there's a time period that you can use it for free before you might have to pay, or a certain group of people maybe that are doing very worthy work in the world but just don't have the ability to pay. We're looking for ways to clearly define something like that. So you'll have to stay tuned to learn more specifics about pricing, but that's generally how we'll be approaching that. I see from Amy, have we used this with elementary school students? We have not yet, but I would really love to see that happen. I would think that students, at that age would just get sucked right into this process and have a great experience using it. So I'd love to see that happen. See this.
The fog.
Oh, the fog. Yeah. Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't get to explain that. I meant to. You can add fog to any interest point or causal connector on the map. And the purpose of fog is to essentially put a pin in it for later. It's when somebody in the group says something that others maybe don't agree with. There may be some debate. Maybe there's a lack of data that would help us really understand whether that thing that was on the map is true or accurate. We don't want to just sideline the entire group's progress. We want to be able to move on from something like that and come back to it later. And so fog is just a visual cue that we're a little foggy about that and we need to come back to it.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Jeff, so much. Really appreciate take down his email, jeff@blearning.com. Contact Jeff. If you want to be a beta tester, have comments and ideas for him, please do. Thank you, everyone. It was wonderful to see this whole community come together. And Jeff, thank you so much for sharing. We're very excited about Cauzality. It's really going to inform and help the field and support, the important work that everyone here is doing. So making thinking visible. Thank you all.